Hello Dan, we're ready to roll on your 1995 Level 3 Plus Dodge Viper Custom Supercharged by Doug Levin Motorsports. Bear with me, I'll do the best I can to give you information. I've got Raymond here, and he's going to help me identify some of the important parts that you can work with. Raymond right now is opening the trunk to show you how to check your fuel and your level auxiliary cell. What we're showing you here is a rollover valve, and that is for, in the event of an unfortunate rollover, that valve there will stop fuel from coming out of the vent. Up top, above the fuel cell, what you're looking at right here, it's just a extra filter that we added so throughout any road debris, you don't have to road problem in the fuel cell. It's just an added feature, and it doesn't serve any purpose more than just keeping additional debris from the road out of your vehicle or out of your vehicle for fuel. Okay, this is checking your fuel. The first thing you do is pop by lifting up on the lever release and open on the lid carefully, lifting the fuel cap and then checking the fuel level inside. As a rule, typically what we'll do is if you can almost touch the fuel that you can see for fuel level, Raymond will show you in just a moment here. Now what I like to do is when I check fuel level, I'll take my finger and I'll put it inside and just drop it down just a little bit, and if you can touch that fuel level, you should be okay. I typically like to maintain at least 3/4 of a fuel level so you can circulate enough and not heat the fuel up by pressurizing and depressurizing the fuel. So we're looking good here. We have enough fuel in the tank. Okay, Raymond, show them how to close it up. Take the gas cap and just reverse what you did to put it back in. And just click. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out is there'll be times where you will see some fuel splashed around on the tank. It's almost very difficult to keep that fuel because it's not sealed as well as we'd like to see it, but any fuel cell I've ever dealt with has shown evidence of having some vapor on across the top of the fuel tank or the fuel cell. Here. Now, onto the vital components for the supercharger system. You'll notice located on the right side by the air conditioning, you'll see, well, if you had air conditioning, you don't anymore, but the AC plenum just below it is the fuel pressure regulator. And what I'd like you to do is ever so often start the car, and while it's running, check the fuel pressure gauge. I have to give you the fuel pressure on initial startup, and it should maintain itself within a pound or two. If you ever notice that the fuel pressure gauge is jumping around, stop the car or don't boost and give us a call and let us know that you have an erratic fuel pressure reading on your gauge. Now Dan, even if you find out or notice that the gauge is jumping around, you don't have to shut off the car. You can even drive it with zero reading on the fuel pressure gauge. Just don't boost the car because that's your additional fuel pressure that you need in order to maintain the supercharged performance. Just adjacent to the fuel pressure regulator, you'll see the fuse holder, and that is for your timing controller. If that fuse is bad or it ever blows, the car won't run, period. So if you ever have a problem where the car won't run, I would suspect this fuse could possibly be bad. So that's one thing you do want to check. Part of your maintenance is checking oil routinely, and as you can see, next to the oil dipstick tube is a spring. And that spring is to keep the pressure from boost from blowing out the dipstick tube. So we just keep a spring on the top to keep the dipstick in check. Right next to the dipstick, of course, is your reservoir for your coolant. And that tank you want to keep an eye on, and as long as you can, just like with the fuel cell, put a finger inside, of course when the car is cold, never hot, you should be okay as far as your coolant level. One part I want to identify now and take a look at is your idle control solenoid. And what this does is it maintains idle for your vehicle. And if you look, you'll see a filter on the end, and that filter should be kept clean. You can wash it, it's reusable, and just clean it periodically and replace the filter. Just put it back on. You will notice dirt, dust if you're driving in an area that has a lot of dust and problems with dirt and debris in the area. You'll definitely notice that filter get dirty quick. So that's something you want to keep clean for a better idle in your vehicle. Okay, moving on. What you're looking at now is your additional injectors. Ever so often you want to check and make sure there's no fuel leaks. You can put your hand around while the engine's not running and feel if there's any fuel present or evident in the area of the injectors. What these injectors do, they can sense if there's a lean out condition when you boost the vehicle and maintain proper air fuel along with your engine performance. One thing very important to maintain proper boost levels is keeping the air filter clean. The air filter located in front of the supercharger, as you can see, is made of stainless steel quality, and I don't think you'll ever have to replace this air filter as you would typically with a paper air filter. It is stainless steel, and you could take it off and wash it. Never run the car without having a filter in place in front of the supercharger. To remove the air filter, you'll notice there's a hose clamp. If you can point out the hose clamp. And you loosen the hose clamp at this point, as you're looking at, to remove the filter. Always make sure when you put it back in place that you push the filter back on hard and tighten up that filter. Now, there's another thing I want to point out. There's only one way this filter will fit, and you'll have to use everyday good common sense, and you'll see where it will have to be rotated just a little bit in order to get it to fit properly on the supercharger. Located just next to the supercharger, you'll notice the air scoop that brings cool fresh air into the supercharger, and on the supercharger you can see the charge air sensor. It's very important that you maintain a good seal between the plug and the plug that plugs into the charge air sensor. That sensor is what senses incoming air and adjusts your parameters on your computer so it knows what type of temperature and how to set the pre-programmed proprietary information in the computer. Ever so often you want to take a look at your spark plug wires and just make sure that they're plugged in tightly into the spark plugs and that no wires at any time are contacting the headers. Contacting the headers will actually damage the wire within seconds, so you just want to make sure that the wires aren't touching the headers. Another good way of proper maintenance is checking all hose clamps, making sure that the clamps are snug. Don't over tighten them, but just make sure you've got a good tight seal for your hose clamps. You can use a screwdriver bladed or a 5/16 nut driver, work adequately, tightening up the hose clamps. Another thing to keep in mind when you do your checklist is keep an eye on your reservoir for your power steering fluid, and the cap has to be on, I would say, pretty tight. It's been common for the caps to come loose and to actually spray unwanted fluid all over the engine, and a possible fire can occur. So you want to make sure that that cap is on pretty tight. Very importantly, if you want to maintain proper boost and belt tension to make the belt live, is keeping the belt nice and taut, not over tightening, but it does have to be somewhat tight, As you see, I'm showing you a shot of what the belt looks like when it's properly tightened. It's kind of hard to tell by just looking at a picture, but look around the areas ever so often and inspect and see if you find abnormal amounts of belt dust. Now, you'll find some dust around the supercharger, which is normal. That's the nature of the beast, to have some dust blow on the supercharger components, especially if you're boosting quite a bit. Watching your boost gauge helps you identify too loose of a belt. If you notice and you watch the boost gauge go up and drop down all of a sudden, there's definitely something you have to look at. Okay, in the event you have to tighten the belt or actually replace it, first thing you'll have to do is, if you see this plastic cowling right here, you'll have to remove that duct in order to facilitate this scoop in the front. Remove this scoop. All you have to do, it's very simple, is unplug the charge air sensor, just located next to the supercharger here that we identified earlier. The only screw that you have to remove to get the scoop off is just underneath the plastic cowling. So just take that screw out or just loosen it up, and this will slide right out once you have that charge air sensor disconnected. In the event you need to tighten the belt or remove it, the tools that you're going to need are going to be a 3/8 ratchet, an extension, a 6-inch, and a crow's foot. And the crow's foot is a 3/4 crow's foot with an adapter for a 3/8. After you remove the front scoop that Raymond's pointing out, go down below and locate the 3/4 nut to be loosened. And what we're showing you here now is the driver with the extension and the crow's foot. And the crow's foot goes underneath the supercharger and loosens up the 3/4 nut in order to tension the belt. And now I'll show you how to tighten the belt once you've loosened it up. Never, and I make a note of it, never loosen up that nut too much. It has to be somewhat firm underneath the supercharger in order to keep a good tension on the pulley while you're going to force tension on that pulley to tighten the belt. And I'll show you exactly what. Okay, once you've loosened up but kept snug the 3/4 bolt that's underneath the supercharger for tightening the tensioning pulley, you'll notice located just underneath the Y pipe there's a bolt, and that bolt has a 9/16 head. And what you'll do is count the amount of turns that you're going to turn the head on that 9/16 bolt, and that forces the tension on the tensioner pulley. Rotating it clockwise direction to the right will tension the belt. Now, you don't have to go too much because you can actually snap the belt, but you want to go just enough so the belt will maintain the proper tension. Once you're done tightening up that bolt, make sure you go back underneath the supercharger and firmly tighten the bolt. It has to be firm to tight underneath to maintain the pressure on the bolt to keep the supercharger tensioning pulley from loosening up. Another component that you want to check ever so often, located underneath the additional injector controllers, are the plugs or the plug wires that plug into the injectors, and ever so often just firmly push on them and make sure that they're plugged in correctly. That's something that you do periodically, and of course you'll find on the other side over here, just above the supercharger, is your other plug, and the other plugs need to be tightened up or pushed into place to make sure that they maintain the proper connection. That's very, very important. Another part of your proper maintenance procedure is making certain that your clamps, we call them band clamps, are nice and snug to tight, and ever so often you want to take a deep socket, it's a 7/16 deep socket, and put it on the end of the screw area and tighten down on the clamps to make certain that they can't blow off. You'll see there's one clamp here, a nut, and on the other side just next to that is another nut. And of course on the other side you'll find the same thing, and what you'll want to do is just ever so often make sure they're nice and snug to tight. An important part for your cooling system is keeping the front fascia tank, and I'll show you, located in the front of the vehicle. On the right side of the vehicle, located in front of the fascia panel, or actually behind the fascia panel, is a coolant overflow tank we call a puke tank. That tank has to be maintained at a certain level. Right now it's sitting pretty well at its full mark when the car is cool. What you want to do, if you have to add coolant to that tank, when you need to facilitate the tank in order to check its level or to add coolant, one of the things you do is remove the front plug located in front of the tire. Just take that plug out and get either a mirror or some small inspection mirror and look inside, and you can get to that tank and check the maintenance level and just keep it up to par. In front of the deaeration tank, or located just the top of it, is this hose, and what you want to do is you can take this hose off. If you have to add any coolant to the overflow tank, you remove the hose, pull it off gently, and you can get a turkey baster or anything like a funnel and start filling the coolant tank or the overflow tank in front of the fascia panel. Once again, just ever so easily remove this hose and you hold it up in the air, and while it's up in the air you can fill it with the coolant that you need to add for the overflow. Another thing I don't want to forget to mention to you is located underneath the bypass or the dump valve, which is located here. If you look just down below, you'll notice there's more hose clamps, and that's a hump hose. Underneath that hump hose are some other clamps which you'll need to maintain and make sure they stay tight and make sure they don't blow off. In the event of you're boosting around town, you want to keep them nice and snug. Okay, inside the cockpit, you'll see just located underneath the steering wheel is your timing controller, and the timing controller knob is turned to the right in order to reduce timing. It'll never advance timing, it'll just reduce it. And what you do, depending on the fuel octane level that you're going to use, is just take this knob here and count the amount of clicks that you want to retard the timing. Just remember, it's right to retard. And you can count the clicks to see where you basically keep it at for its normal setting. We set it about 4 to 5 clicks, or you can go about 2 to 3 clicks depending on the gas that you use. If you have only 91 octane in the main tank, then what you're going to want to do is, of course, take the knob and turn it up to approximately maybe 7, 8, 9 clicks, or all the way up into the 12 o'clock position. Typically what we did was we kept the knob here and turned it up, I would say about 1, 2, almost 3 clicks. You can keep it here or just keep it down 1 with some good gas. Now if you mix a little too much octane, and there's almost never too much octane, but it does slow you down a little bit, you can keep it almost to the flat position, which inherently is going to remove some timing, but not a noticeable amount. So back once again, when you have some decent gas in the tank but you don't have enough octane, what you do is just start turning it and just count the amount of clicks so you know where your settings are at. Now detonation is not always audible, you can't always hear it. So what you may want to do is shut the windows on the vehicle. You may not be able to because it is an RT10, but if you do have them in place, you put the car in 3rd gear and you listen for any pinging or knock in the engine. It may be a little too difficult, so just as a safety feature, maybe go 1 or 2 clicks to keep it on the safe side. So once again, it's right to retard and left to advance the timing, but it won't go any advance more than what the system is set out to be. Okay, your boost gauge located just on top of the steering column. As you can see plainly, it's at 0 boost because we're sitting here. Of course the engine's not running. Normally as you're cruising along, you'll see the needle drops below 0 because as the engine's running and idling, it goes into a vacuum mode. When you're going into boost, that needle will go above 0 and it's telling you that you're in the boost mode. Now you never want to, and make an important note of it, to be in 4th or 5th or 6th gear and have the engine RPM below 2,000 RPM or at a low RPM and try boosting the vehicle, because it can be detrimental. It's not a good idea. It can advance timing and cause detonation. So what you want to do is, when you do boost, you want to make sure that you have the RPMs up quite a bit, or not quite a bit, or around 2,500, maybe 3,000 RPMs, in order to get the proper amount of boost and keep it safe. Another thing is that boost is relative to load and RPM, so when you're boosting the vehicle, bring the RPMs up. The more you bring up the RPMs, the more you're going to bring up the boost level, and you're going to notice that when you bring the car up to about 5,500 RPM or 6,000 RPM and you shift, you'll probably see the boost gauge or the needle go up to about 11 to 12 pounds of boost. The lower you keep the RPM, the less power you make, and the boost level stays down to a lower number. One important thing, if you want to know if your belt's slipping, it may be a little difficult at first because you can have tire or wheel spin, is boost the car, maybe in third gear, and let it turn up to full boost. If you see the needle go up and go past 10 pounds of boost and start to drop down as your RPM is increasing on your tach, and you watch that needle drop down, that would mean that you're possibly having a leak somewhere, or that your belt is slipping. Once again, it's important to keep an eye once in a while on your boost gauge. So if you're not getting the boost that you typically do, it's possible that you're having a problem with a leak or a loose belt. Or even if you can't get any boost, you may have blown a tube off or a hose off or lost your belt. It's not common, but it's not uncommon to throw a supercharger belt according to the miles or where you're running the vehicle. Right now we're focusing on engine operating temperature, and one of the important things to understand with any high performance vehicle is the more you boost or the more horsepower you make, apparently you're going to run more temperature. So one of the things that you want to do is you can boost quite a bit, and as you're driving along, let it cool down for a short bit, let some fresh air go into the intercooler, and as fresh air goes into the intercooler, it's going to cool down the charge, so obviously you can make more power and make a safe power. Looking once again at the temperature gauge, when you see the needle go to about, I would say about 2.25, which is the point just before the 250, you don't want to boost when you get up to that area because you're getting too much temperature into the engine. By the way, that is normal to run that type of temperature under heavy load or stop-go traffic. Once again, you want to cool down the engine, just drive it a little bit and let some fresh air go into the intercooler and of course into the radiator. One of the things to keep the temperature down is of course to go to your next gear. If you're cruising along and you're in second gear, you may want to shift to third or fourth gear, and keeping the RPMs down, by doing that will actually maintain a lower temperature because the engine's not producing more heat than it can cool down. Oil pressure will variate anywhere between 20 to 70 pounds, maybe a little higher. Never get nervous if you see the gauge actually start to, at idle, drop down to 20, maybe a little less than 20. Keep in mind we're feeding the supercharger with oil, and we have to bleed off from the engine oil into the supercharger, and right where the oil pressure gauge is fed, you'll see there's a fitting that feeds the oil to the supercharger. So in actuality you may have more pressure, but it just doesn't show it at the gauge because we're bleeding off some of the oil at the gauge area. So not to get nervous, it's normal. The higher the temperature, the lower the gauge. You're going to notice that too. So as you're driving along and you notice that the temperature goes up, you'll notice that the oil pressure actually comes down. Don't get nervous. The only way I would get nervous, if you see it go to the first tick on the gauge, you may want to question that. It's always good to be safe than sorry. Another important note that I wanted to bring up to you is to keep in mind that if you take a look, you'll see two rocker switches here on the bezel or the console. This rocker switch here, of course, is to operate the fog lamps, and the rocker switch that you see to the right of it is to operate the seat eject button. So if you have a passenger next to you and they want to vomit, you don't want to get vomit in the car, just activate this button here and lo and behold, they'll be gone. I do recommend taking the top off first from the vehicle so they don't hit their head and mess their hair up. So once again, and you know I'm kidding, watch that button. One note that I'll bring up to you, Dan, is that before you drive the car, the proper tire pressure, I probably would check when the tires are cold in the rears to be about 29 psi. You don't really need to go higher than that because when you drive the vehicle, you know the pressure is going to go up in the tire. So I'd probably keep the rears at 29. Along with that, I'd probably keep the front at 29 also. To open the hood, you can see located just in front of the intercooler underneath is a new hood release. The reason we had to replace the hood release is because the intercooler is in the way of the old hood release. So you'll see the knob obviously located just below the front bumper, and what you'll do is just pull on that knob and it will release the hood, so it will go upward. One of the things you may want to do is when you pull that release, push down on the very front of the hood, and as you're pushing down on the hood, pull on the release. It'll help assist the release pressure, so it makes it a lot easier to open the hood. Okay, one thing I don't want you to forget about that I didn't mention earlier is the type of engine oil that we'd like you to use, and that would be Mobil 1 Synthetic 10W30. You don't have to change the oil more than usual, but if you run the vehicle hard, I'd recommend changing it every 2,000 to 3,000 miles. If you're going to run it harder, maybe about 1,500, maybe even 1,000 miles. 1,000 is overkill, but it never hurts. So once again, 10W30, Mobil 1 synthetic oil will definitely work for you. One thing very important and worth mentioning is the left and right throttle cables. The right throttle cable, as you can see, is going to be the follower or needs to be synchronized with the left side. The left throttle cable has to be either ahead or exactly even with the right throttle cable. The reason being is the throttle position sensor is located on the left side of the throttle body and not on the right side. So what you want to do is you want to step on the accelerator pedal and have somebody watch to see which cable moves first, being the left or the right. You want to see the left cable move either slightly ahead of the right or have the right side exactly even with the left. So that's very important. That will actually eliminate bucking, or what we call bull hunching, where the car wants to buck and pull as you're driving in traffic or stop and go. You'll find that it's really annoying, and to keep those throttle cables exactly even, or having the left throttle cable, which of course is this one once again, to have that one lead ahead of the other one. Just a tiny amount will do it. You don't have to put it too far ahead, but it's very important. You loosen up the nut that you see on top and you pull back on the throttle cable and you step down real hard on the accelerator pedal, and it will actually position it for you. If you have to, you can play around a little bit and set it so it gives you one of the best settings so you can visualize and see what you need to do as far as keeping them both even. Right now our Vipereus Raymond is using Mother's Polish, the same polish you probably want to use, or that I would recommend for keeping the supercharger unit nice and shiny. Of course, being aluminum, it does oxidize. It doesn't take too long to get the aluminum looking oxidized, and it takes away from the polished finish. So the more you work on the aluminum with the Mother's Polish, the better that it looks. this character that you see here is one of our Viper techs. This is Raymond. And Raymond is very critical and instrumental in our supercharging program here at Doug Levin Motorsports. The man you're looking at now is Craig. Craig is our shop foreman. He's in charge of supercharger systems and getting the vehicles and making sure that they're ready to go. If Craig says no, they don't go. I'll give you a quick look at just some of the vehicles under construction here right now. Take a peek real quick here. Just walk through. You can see at a time we may have anywhere between 15 to 20 Vipers in this shop location. And we have another location that we keep vehicles before they're ready to be or have their performance package installed. Here's a look at a 2003 Viper. It's going to sport one of our supercharger packages, and guaranteed this car is going to make some outrageous horsepower. Real nice customer, nice guy to deal with, so we're really proud and happy to have the car on board. Get a scan over to another vehicle. This car here, we're hoping that it's going to make some real serious power. We're getting ready to bolt on a package that should put the car hopefully into the 900 rural horsepower range. Of course, with power like that, it's not for the everyday user. Over in the back, you can see we have a 99 ACR. The one right next to it is an ACR. The wheels that are on it are just wheels that we put on, so we didn't scratch them. They were beautiful HREs, so we took them off while the vehicle was under construction. If for some reason, in the event you need to service the fuel pump being for the additional fuel for the supercharging unit, it's located just behind the right rear wheel. If you remove this panel, you can get to the pump and you can access the filter for the pump. The pump filter doesn't have to be checked too often. Maybe in a year from now or 10,000 miles, it takes a 10 micron filter. If you ever do need to locate a filter, feel free to give us a call and we'll be able to hook you up with the right filter that you're going to need. So once again, if you take that panel off, just the lower panel, you can facilitate the pump and the filter. Fire that baby up. 1 second here. That's a perfect picture. Well, let me tell you something. Since you were in diapers.
You told us when he...
Okay. One thing I almost forgot to point out to you is the fuse holder that you see right here that has the red tie wrap on it. If you do a trip and you want to disconnect the fuel pump, you can pull the fuse out to stop the pump from running so it doesn't preheat the fuel. And as you can see, the fuse, just remove it, put it in a conspicuous area so you don't forget to put the fuse back in for running boost. Okay, here we go. Hey, you notice how the Viper is a step above the Porsche? There you go. That Porsche is shaking right now. What you're looking at here right now is the way to strap down the car so it gets traction. That's the way to do it. Extra tight so it gets traction and doesn't spin at high horsepower. Looks like we've got a Viper coming out of the shop with a blower on it, making room for a new owner. How tight is that strap?
Huh?
How tight is that strap?
As tight as you can get.
Yeah. Any musical notes?